The panel and organisers are joining from 6 different time zones, so welcome wherever you currently are in your day. I'm Tamsin Green, and I'm going to start with a short introduction to the SPP network, which I founded back in 2021, and will then hand over to my co-host Dolly to introduce the theme of this year's Earth Day talk. We will then have individual presentations from each of the panel, followed by a moderated conversation and audience Q&A. So please share your questions in the Q&A box, and we will come to these at the end of the session. The talk is being recorded and will be publicly available on YouTube following the event. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, the Sustainability Fund at the University of Westminster, for their support of this event. So the Sustainable Photobook Publishing Network, or if that's too much of a mouthful, just SPP Network, is a platform for the exchange of ideas and knowledge about how both as individuals and collectively we can move towards a more sustainable photobook publishing practice. We develop open source research and practical resources, as well as organising talks, workshops and exhibitions. And we try to make space for open discussion and asking questions, to which we might each find very different answers. The network started here in London almost 3 years ago and has now grown into a global community. And whilst it's very important to create local networks for collaboration and sharing of practical information, there's also a big benefit to global conversations on the issues that connect us all together. So today's event is part of our annual Earth Day series, which began in 2022 as a commitment to having an ongoing discussion about the challenges and opportunities for sustainability in the photobook. And I'm now going to hand over to Dolly to talk more about today's event.
Thank you, Tamsin. First of all, we want to just start off by acknowledging that we're in the midst of a very intense moment of multiple geopolitical conflicts. And while we're gathered to discuss sustainability in the photobook ecosystem, we are adamant that sustainability is inherently about both people and planet. From Gaza and all the Middle East to Ukraine to Sudan and beyond, we all feel the ripples and hope to do what each of us can to expedite permanent ceasefires and self-determination, in addition to taking steps to make and buy books more responsibly in the face of a climate emergency. To that end, we are addressing all in the photobook ecosystem, by which we mean individual bookmakers, small to medium to large publishers, printers, distributors, booksellers, educators, award sponsors, as well as consumers. At each juncture of this ecosystem, it is apparent that critical mass, which is joining forces to combine our collective voices, is necessary to enable progress. In turn, that makes that progress more financially affordable, another key aspect of sustainability. Our panelists today come from diverse geographies, both coasts of the US, South America, and the Arctic Circle. Each of those regions presents its own challenges to making it and accessing books. Having a global conversation reinforces what is shared amongst all of us, yet with local specificity of solutions. Much is the same, but different. It's this kind of global coexistence that allows us to connect the dots from publishing and beyond into our daily lives, which has been a longtime focus of our moderator, Delphine Bedel, for many years.
Thank you, Dolly. We're very happy to have Delphine Bedel joining us from Amsterdam for this event. She has a very long history in both publishing photobooks and teaching publishing practices. She was the founder of Meta Books and coined the term publishing as artistic practice in an effort to go beyond the artist's book and to recognise publishing as an academic pursuit. And as part of her teaching, she developed the provocation, "Is your book worth cutting trees?" And this was used as a starting point for her discussions with students who were developing their own publishing projects. Delphine is now a feminist curator, writer, speaker, and art consultant. She works with leading art and design institutions, photography festivals, and museums. And her focus is on photography, visual culture, biohacking, and gender equality. And she's also a long-time advocate of a more inclusive art sector, and is co-founder and chair of the non-profit Engagement Arts NL. So over to you, Delphine.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining for all over the world. Yeah, please put in the chat where you're joining us from so we have an idea. I'm very excited with this talk because it's unusual constellation that we brought together from the Arctic Circle to Brazil to the US to talk about different perspectives on sustainability. And I thank SVP for the invitation to moderate this conversation. And yeah, so I've been involved in publishing for over 15 years, organizing education program, writing, book fairs, events. And when I coined, as Tasmin mentioned, the expression publishing as an artistic practice, at that point in 2008, the conversation was very stuck on the aesthetic of the artist book. And it didn't encompass all the aspects of concept, production, distribution, preservation, sustainability, access, inclusion and exclusion. And without going too deep into it, but since the establishment of the Gutenberg Press in Europe, we may want to think as publishing as a space of emancipation, which it is, but it was mainly a space of exclusion, a space of control of who has access to certain discourse. And so that's some of the topics I've been writing also extensively about. And so we have different speakers. We will all introduce some of them, and we will look into, as it's a very broad topic, we will focus mostly around the practice of the guests that we have tonight, some of the questions that they are raising through their practice and in the context in which they are working, and what challenge they face, and questions, and what solutions and propositions they are developing in the context in which they are working. And the first person I would like to welcome is Tanya Busse, who is an artist, curator, publisher. She's the founder of Mondo Books. She's based in Tromsø, and also founder of the Arctic Art Book Fair. So she will introduce us to some of the project. And as an artist, she's also co-founder of the duo New Mineral Collective. And her practice addresses a question of ecology, landscape, and the human relationship to nature. So I'm very happy to have you with us, and you have an opening tonight, so I'm even more grateful that you made the time to be with us. So let's go. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you, Delphine. And yes, thank you for the nice introduction. Yes, I'm Tanya Busse, and I will share my screen, get right to it. So tonight, or today, depending where you are, I'll be speaking about Mondo Books. And Mondo Books is currently run by myself and Marianne Stefan and Nicholas Siepen. It's an independent book platform that mediates artist publications through publishing projects, distribution, book fairs, exhibition launches, etc. We also pursue research-based projects, looking sort of into the topics around printed matter and its relationship to social movements, particularly in the Barents region and the Euro-Arctic region. And so we are based in Tromsø, which is 70 degrees north. And it's also, we reside on the traditional lands of the Sami people, or Sápmi, which spans, as you can see in this beautiful image by Hans Ragnar Mathisen in his book Sami Outlaws. You can see that Sápmi sort of moves beyond borders. So it is Norway, northern Sweden, northern Finland, and northern Russia. And what I really like also about this map is that you also see the perspective from where we are. So there's a big shift in perception there. And we are currently, we run a Rhizo studio and also a bookshop. And we are currently housed in the Contemporary Art Center in Tromsø. And we're a community that is based sort of on the periphery with a different set of limitations that also create new opportunities and new ways of thinking in terms of how we think about materials, production, shipping, and getting books into Tromsø and out. There's part of having a smaller community that is also about social sustainability. We learn so much every day from the people around us, from local indigenous knowledge, also when it comes to environmental issues, like how to prioritize the printing, production, publishing, distribution, knowledge exchange in peripheral areas. And it's also a way of thinking maybe against the neo-colonial ways of organizing the world. So what's important to us is how to make it meaningful, to build communities in smaller, isolated places. And what that can teach us, you know, ways in which we can grow and also strengthen relationships with our environment and also work with local resources. Because I find very often we kind of undervalue local resources. And for us, it's part of our learning and also research that we try to employ into Mondo. Quickly moving on. Publishing, we started publishing in 2015, mainly to support our, or kind of like to sustain our own individual artistic practices. And we went for a risograph machine because of sort of like the environmentally friendly aspects of it, in which it uses more organic soy inks. We often order Arctic paper. And we also see the Rhizo as kind of a democratic way of producing books. We usually do small print runs. And we often host also workshops, like educational workshops with the Rhizo machine and working collectively. One example of one of our publications is called Tales by Claudia Bascauen. It's a duotone Rhizo print in an edition of 75. But also, when it comes to maybe needing larger print runs, such as this book called De Versmanna lever blant reptiler by Marie Marie, then we very often actually print in the Baltics with Livonia Press. And that's because, well, let's see, it's, yeah, how to say this quickly, it's more cost effective, and especially than printing domestically in Norway. And they have high print quality and also high environmental standards, and they match with our kind of sustainability goals. I also show this publication as well as the next, Towards Home, because these are publications that are multilingual. So the previous publication was in Northern Sami and in Norwegian, currently being translated into English. And as well as this book, it's trilingual publication, Inuit, Sami, and English, as well as there's a French version. It's co-published with the Canadian Centre for Architecture and Valise Publishing. But I wanted to mention these two publications because inclusivity is quite important for us. Because where we are situated, it often demands that we work with multiple languages. And so translation is also a big part of what we hope to facilitate. We also have bookbinding workshops. This is one example of working with a Sami elder named Hans Ragnar Mathisen. And he's a cartographer, artist, and bookbinder. And he kind of emphasizes material exploration from the area and also the reuse of materials such as hides, fish skin, and old flannel shirts even. It's kind of like whatever is on hand, we explore with him. And there's this element of craftsmanship, which I think gives these books kind of a longevity and a durability that is essential when thinking about kind of sustainability, and also with reuse and reimagining local materials. Distribution. This is where we began, and this is still one of our biggest challenges. It's like the weakest link, I feel, within the life cycle of a book, for us at least. And that is mainly because where we're situated, it's incredibly expensive to ship as well as import books, because Norway is not part of the EU. So we have very high import taxes. There's long shipping times, and also there's the big carbon footprint. So for now, our hub is in Mondo Books, where we sell a lot of local materials, and local materials being self-published as well, from artists living locally. We also try to create partnerships regionally with different art institutions as well as bookstores. Let's see. In the past, we've been invited to create different spaces. So this is a Lofoten International Art Festival. This is another way in which we can get publications from Tromsø out into the world. This is a Vaga, Center for Contemporary Art, where we installed in the front of their art space. And we also participate in like book fairs. This is Sharjah Art Book Fair. And instead of tapping only into kind of like global channels of distribution, we also saw the need to build our own channels with other Arctic partners to also share experience and discuss challenges that we face when it comes to local meeting global flows. So this is when the Arctic Art Book Fair was established in 2020. And I will try and breeze through this. But it's an international book fair and self-publishing festival that takes place every few years in a different Arctic country. These photographs are from Tromsø, which was the first edition. And the festival is committed to Arctic content with a focus on indigenous perspectives, underrepresented voices, and cross-border collaborations. In 3 days, we brought together 75 different small-scale publishers, artists, and independent publishers from Northern Canada, Iceland, Denmark, Sapmi, Northern Russia, Alaska, etc. There you see Delphine in the deep end of the swimming pool. Yes, there was a lot of research that was involved with the book fair, essentially also asking, is there a need for the book fair? And if so, what kind of qualities do we want to bring to it? So we started thinking about the image of the North, and landed on having it in an old swimming pool, currently defunct, but was made in 1960s, beautiful old modernist swimming hall. And we moved into this space and built a kind of installation. And in the end, we tried to bring together a diverse group of materials that both celebrate productions from the circumpolar North and also show how printed matter connects with larger overarching contemporary issues in the North: land rights, extractivist industries, geopolitics, climate change. We also we tried to give highlight works and voices that have been left out of the canon. That's important. Publishing photography and literary works, as this area historically has been considered a periphery. We tried to move everything to the center. And so we see the book fair as kind of a small part of a larger decolonial process, which tries to highlight an area that has been underrepresented, and perspectives that have in one way or another, not been at the forefront, not been given space. And the next, and maybe what we can follow up on in the discussion after, is also the need for alternative models of distribution. And this is what the book fair was also trying to explore through a very large geographic area. You know, how can we create new ways of kind of replenishing smaller communities with materials, as well as circulating those materials. And the first edition went quite well. The second one will be in Greenland in 2025, and you are all welcome to join, and also to kind of follow us on the next odyssey of the book fair. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for your wonderful presentation. I think SPP will take on to the next speakers that we have.
Yeah, Tanya, somebody asked if you would put the name of the first book. Can you put that into the chat when you can? Thanks. And now, next up, we have Emily Sheffer joining us from Connecticut on the East Coast, sorry, of the US. Emily is a photographic artist, educator, and book designer. She is the founder of Dust Collective, a handmade photography book publisher. She earned her MFA in photography from the University of Hartford, where she currently teaches. I'd been following Dust Collective already when I met Emily at a book fair and was inspired to hear details about their publishing practice, which she'll now share with you. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. There's so many familiar names in the audience list here. I'm happy to see everyone. I'm going to share my screen. I'm so inspired by all of the panelists that are here with us today. I want to get back in the studio and start working. Okay, today I'm going to tell you about my publishing project, Dust Collective. I hope to give you a quick behind the scenes of some ways I consider sustainability in my practice. In some ways, I hope to improve on things in the future, and I think that's why this conversation is so needed. I'm zooming today from the University of Hartford in Connecticut. That's why you see this industrial furniture behind me. I'm in my office. I'm a visiting assistant professor of photography, so I have many hyphens to my titles. My world includes teaching, publishing, making my own art, and working as a studio assistant. So what I'm telling you about today is a facet of a larger and more interwoven life in the arts. I'm sure it's the same for many of you in the audience today. So everything with Dust Collective happens on a very small and slow scale, because it's just me working in my studio. So what do we do at Dust Collective? Simply put, Dust Collective publishes handmade, small edition photography books. I design, print, and hand bind all books in my studio in Massachusetts. In addition, we distribute a small selection of independent artist-made books. And by that, I mean handmade books that artists make themselves in their own studios. Who are we? Dust Collective was founded by me in partnership with Barbara Bosworth, who is here in the audience today. Barbara is a large format landscape photographer, and we have worked together on many projects for nearly a decade. I seek out to publish artists who are concerned with landscape studies. My artist list now mostly includes women who are based on the East Coast of America. And photographers who are specifically looking at landscapes. So these are some of my current practices in publishing, some ways I consider sustainability. As I said, I make small editions of typically under 100 copies. Frankly, this is a niche market and often a labor of love over profit, just being honest here. So I don't want to offer more books than there are buyers. Mostly my books are printed on demand, which means I start with designing, making, and listing a book for sale. Then as orders come in, I make each book in my studio. This means I never have to use more materials than needed. This is both economic, time-saving, and I'm only fulfilling what the market is asking me to. Distribution is largely on the East Coast. It's where I live, and it's the easiest places for me to get to. We're lucky to have many fantastic and well-attended book fairs on the East Coast. I'm sure if any of you have been to the New York Art Book Fair, you know how crowded it can get. And I always take that as a great sign that there's a large public interest in what we're all doing. And on that note, the New York Art Book Fair is next week. So if you're in town, you should go see it. I pay special attention to placing titles in public and university libraries, as well as in museum collections. This is for the longevity of the book itself, as well as public accessibility. So somebody can request to see my books from the New York Public Library. Finally, I do specifically focus on landscape-based or maybe objects in the natural world in the books I publish. And I hope that the beauty and delicate nature of the photography I'm publishing helps remind viewers of what we have to lose if this climate crisis continues. I think books allow for a slow look at photographs. It's like a slow and personal look at photographs. And I think this meditative quality adds to that experience. Yeah. I have some in progress ideas. They're not really in practice yet. It's slow to get anything going in my studio. So these are things I'm working on. I want to make limited edition ephemera that will entirely be made from cutoffs and scraps in my bookmaking and studio practice. So I designed my books to be as efficient with paper sizes as I can, but my studio is full of piles of odd sizes of paper cutoffs that I can't bring myself to get rid of. So I'm hoping to make some small scale ephemera, photographic ephemera from that material. I would also like to expand my selection of artist-made books, specifically seeking out artists who are interested in photography and handmade artist books and don't have a way to distribute them. I kind of like to put together this library where people can show their work. So some of you might be in the audience who fit that description. Let me know. So for future aspirations in being a more eco-friendly publisher, I really would like to figure out packaging as well as shipping issues. I use a lot of material in when I package and ship books. My books are fragile and quite delicate and often require plastic wrapping for both transportation and waterproofing as it goes through the mail system. I don't want the books to show up at a buyer's house damaged, so I usually resort to plastic. I would like to eventually become plastic free with my packaging materials. So I'm exploring options in plastic versus paper backed tape, bleached versus natural cardboard, bubble wrap versus crumpled paper as packing material. Finally, I would like to find an affordable supplier for packing material that's not Uline, who has political views that I don't align with. So I look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists, and I look forward to hearing the Q&As from the audience. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Emily. That was a great presentation. So next up we have João, Pedro, Lima and Alix Breda joining us from the forests outside of Sao Paulo, Brazil, where they are co-founders of the independent publishing imprint Selo Turvo. Alix is an agroecologist and visual artist and works as an editor, researching different ways of interacting with the environment through photobooks. João is a graphic designer and visual artist and also a part of Lovely House, which is the only photobook store in Brazil. And we met very early on in the SPP network when we did a feature of his publication, Contra Natura. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend you take a look at the book and the feature. And hopefully he's also going to talk about it this evening. Over to you, João and Alix.
Hi, everyone. First, I just want to say thanks to Tamsin and Dolly for inviting us. And we're going to share here our presentation. So, as Tamsin already introduced us, but we have a publisher called Selo Turvo. We founded and published in 2020. And I think at the time it was really just a place for us to publish our own work. We were kind of experimenting with zines and graphic design, which is something that was very new to us. And I think as we grew kind of like organically, we started to get to know new artists and new photographers and decided to start publishing other people. And we usually seek original projects that experiment with the object itself and with what goes beyond the printed image. We really like to think about ways to cultivate and fictionalize the land. We really like to look for projects that can, through dream spaces, talk to nature and the landscapes and the environment. We mostly print smaller editions, and we like to really research papers and water-based ink and different kinds of binding, just different materials to produce our books in a more handmade and manual way. We really like to write on our own books and burn their pages and use like pressed flowers or perfume and just really create kind of like their little mythological universe of books. And even though we do use printing houses, most of our books are printed on our own inkjet printer. We also work with a local binder who does most of our books. And we've been using more ordinary and local certified papers, which I think we might discuss this a bit later in the conversation, kind of like the lack and limitation that we have with local earthenware papers here. And so, yes, as Tamsin was saying, Contra Natura, which is the book that João made, in 2022, we actually launched a funding campaign to print João's book and to actually buy our inkjet printer. And that's how Contra Natura was made and was featured in the SPP, I think was the first batch of case studies from SPP, which was also how we got to know the platform, which was very exciting. And it was the first book that we printed on our inkjet printer. So this is just a very short introduction about Selo Turvo, because we're also here representing Lovely House, which is the publisher, but is also known as the only bookstore in Brazil, which is specialized in photo books. And they also organize a photo book festival here in Brazil, which is called Festival Imaginária. And it's a space that is very open to create different conversations within photo books. So they have workshops and talks and a book fair. And they also have a very interesting exchange with other publishers and collectives from South America, which I think is very important to us when we think about any form of local sustainability within Photobooks, kind of like to open this dialogue and network with other spaces, both in Brazil, which is already, it's a huge country, but also with other our neighbors from South America.
Yeah.
So I think that for us, sustainability in the scenario that we're kind of like currently living in, it's mostly impossible to exist as a whole. But I think we believe that there are ways of thinking about sustainability that need to be discussed when it comes to production and distribution of photo books here in Brazil. And I think as consumers and bookmakers, and we talked a lot about that with Dolly and Tamsin, about the sustainability coming from this necessity to open routes to kind of collectively find creative ways to consider materials and how to share those materials with other publishers and editors and artists and etc. that are around us, and kind of like to truly create these ecosystems of knowledge when it comes to making books. And one of the biggest challenges for here in Brazil is kind of like to find a balance between what is affordable and what causes less harm, and to whom it causes less harm. And I think a way that we really want to kind of like open this conversation here, and I think we're starting to talk more about that. And we at Selo Turvo, we actually just launched a newsletter and also a photo book editing workshop, which I think we really want those to be places to share different processes and ideas to think of photo books within the environment, and just a place to kind of like share materials and packagings, as Emily was also talking about. We have a really difficult thinking of packaging, like eco-friendly packaging here. So I think we're just trying to find a place to really discuss this with people locally. And we launched this newsletter and this workshop to kind of like start introducing also people who make like homemade paper and ink that use natural and recycled materials. And I really think we just want to create discussions and kind of like share these different ecosystems that we can start to think about local sustainability collectively as people who make and consume books. And I think we're going to discuss later on the conversation. We also have some issues regarding distribution, which is also something that's very hard for us here. But I think we can later on discuss this. I guess that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so for our last panelist now is Michelle Dunn Marsh, and Michelle is the co-founder and publisher of Minor Matters Books. She oversees editorial acquisition, design, and production of their titles, with skills honed over the last 3 decades with Aperture and Chronicle Books, as well as a host of other publishers. She holds a BA from Bard College and an MS in publishing from Pace University. A committed educator, she lectures and teaches internationally and is the author of Seeing, Being Seen, A Personal History of Photography. I personally have known Michelle for years, and it was one random conversation a couple of years ago which encouraged me to consider more deeply what sustainability, the word and the concept, means beyond material choices, and led her to being on this panel. So welcome.
Thanks, Dolly. I'm very excited to be with you all today and setting my timer here because I'm excited for us to join in conversation with each other as well as with all of the participants joining. So I am going to move into sharing my screen. I hope everyone can see that. And move through these fairly quickly. So as Dolly said, I have been involved in publishing for a very long time. I also like to always begin with my ancestors because my tricultural existence of Indo-Burmese, Irish, and American influences are a huge part of the diversity of audiences and artists that I have had the privilege of working with over the last almost 3 decades now in publishing. As much as my background is a part of my identity, books have been a part of my identity from a very young age. And I've had the privilege, as Dolly mentioned, to work with the Aperture Foundation, with Chronicle Books, and with dozens of other publishers as a freelance designer and production consultant, which led into founding Minor Matters with my business partner, former student and friend, Steve McIntyre. And one of the things that was important to me in founding Minor Matters was to bring audiences into a collaborative process in publishing. And so with all of the books that we conceive, there is a pre-sales process, and we seek to bring in 400 to 500 retail sales before we make the book. This is similar to a lot of processes that people have used in terms of crowdfunding. There are 2 major differences. One is that we are only asking people to buy the book. And 2, if we do not find that audience, we do not actually make the book, which is sometimes a painful reality to have conceived and invested in something that doesn't find its way forward. But in terms of this discussion, I do want to mention the relevance of that we are not making books if we cannot find a community that is also choosing with us to be a part of them.
Michelle, sorry.
Sorry.
Your slides are not moving for us. We're still on the title page.
Okay, let me try. Let's see here. Stop share. Let me try again. How is it now?
Yes. So I think, yeah, maybe just show us what was on those previous slides.
Okay, did you see this?
We didn't see any of them apart from the title.
All right, okay. This is my family. As I mentioned, this top shelf represents books that I have worked on in my career. The bottom shelf are works in progress. Tamsin, can you confirm, are the slides moving now?
Yes, perfect, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. So yes, this is a small selection, actually excluding the accordion book on the bottom, which is by Nicholas Galanin. All of the other titles are authored by women, and certainly we take into consideration both the artist and the subject matter of their work, and seek to accurately represent the demographics of the United States in terms of background of the authors that we publish. We focus on the reproduction of art. So we begin with original works, and we seek in our books to get as closely as possible to the feeling. Sometimes that's through interpretation, of course, but the feeling of the original artwork. So in this slide, what you see in the background are proofs that are done to get as close as possible to the artist's intention. We do often work in offset, and we print anywhere from 750 to 2,500 copies of the books that we produce. We began in Seattle and have sold throughout the United States, but wanted to also just share with you that from the beginning, there was an international interest, and this is a topic that's come up that I'm sure we will discuss, of the expenses of shipping books around the world. It was certainly not something we intended when we started to be global, but that is how it has ended up for us over the last 10 years, that there has been interest there. The X's represent places we have printed, and I will speak a little bit more, I think, in the conversation about decisions going into that. Iceland was one of our favorite places to print. They have very high environmental standards, and unfortunately that printer has closed, and that is a circumstance that has repeated in a number of situations of partners that we have worked with. when we think about sustainability, we think, as Dolly mentioned, not only of materials, but of the books themselves. I brought this from my mentor, who was a production manager at Aperture for 40 years, and I envision the books that we make existing longer than we will be on the planet by a great deal. And so I think first and foremost about quality that will last, and that the paper will age well, that the thread and the glue will sustain, and that these books can go forth and reach broader audiences than perhaps the work could on its own. We independently distribute our books. We do not sell them on Amazon. And we, again, can talk a little bit more about distribution. This is an example of a book of ours that was discovered in a museum store, work licensed to be in a building that the Technion and Cornell built in Roosevelt Island. So again, showing how that artwork through the book finds new audiences and lives in the world. When I think about the definitions of sustainability and the idea of maintaining, also harvesting responsibly, not depleting our resources, we think both about the books that can last, about the audiences that are owning these books, about the workers and their happiness and their skill set. But I will end with the realities of cost. As we think about historically illuminated manuscripts would take about 30 sheep to make a single book. That was expensive then, and books were precious. And so my question to end with is that while books are incredibly desirable, do we still think of them as precious? And what is the currency exchange we are willing to place on that? And how does that affect access? Thank you so much. I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, Michelle, and for the key points that you brought into the conversation. And we see already some reoccurring themes, like of access, of audience, of whose voice is represented by the publishing house, and the increasing cost of production and distribution. And I think the last 3 points that you made about books being desirable currency of exchange and access is something I would like to come back to, and welcome everyone back in the room. All the speakers are here. And also for us, for everyone watching, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. You can also put where you are connecting from, and we will take the question at the end in the Q&A, or if they're timely, we will take them within the conversation. So please use the chat to actively to connect with the different speakers. Thank you. When we had a preliminary talk to prepare this conversation, and we started to discuss some of the cost of making something sustainable, I would like to go back to João and Alix, because some of the figures you mentioned were absolutely astronomical, and so I would like if you could give us a bit more information about the context in which you're working to describe the environment, because of course, if we think of climate change and global warming and deforestation, Brazil is the first place that comes to mind. And so there is also an element that is coming in the presentation of Tanya and yours, which is also indigenous population. Today they represent 5% of the world population, but they care of 80% of the biodiversity, which is also a very important element when we think of extractivism. So there is this tension in the book, which is both an extractivist product. We need natural resources, water, trees, electricity, labor, to produce book, but it's also been for centuries one of the way of sharing and accessing knowledge. And there is this tension between this desire that you mentioned, Michelle, to produce the books, and as well the tension that you presented, João and Tanya, also in access to local resources. Would you like to say a few words more about the context in which you're working on in Brazil?
Yeah, I think first, like here in Brazil, we have an issue that's a huge lack and kind of limited variety of paper, for example. So there are few local and certified earthenware papers, and most of them are imported, which means they're more expensive, obviously. And I think not only the papers, but also ink and kind of like the equipment of printing houses, they are also imported. So it's just something that it's an issue here, and something that we sometimes criticize a lot is that it exists a kind of monopoly when it comes to printing houses. For example, there is one specific printing house here that has access and the distribution rights to some papers, and only them have those rights. For example, Monkey, which is a common paper, I think, used in Europe and the United States. And this printing house, they're the only one that has the rights for the paper. So if you want to use that paper, you're kind of forced to print there. And like we were talking in the preliminary chat, the issue is that you can obviously choose to print your book there, or you also can like buy an apartment, because that's kind of like the same price, which is insane for us. So I think this lack of unlimited resources, it's something that's still very a difficulty for us here in Brazil.
Yeah.
And I think obviously we can all relate to that from different perspectives and different countries, but so I think that's one of the biggest issue here also.
So yeah, just to add to that, it is actually, there are large conversations in the United States about organic products and what it takes for something to be labeled organic, which comes with a lot of fees. And the same thing is true on the paper front, also even in Europe, that certain houses have to go through certification in order to buy certain papers. So if the printer decides, okay, I'm not going to continue to maintain this certification because it's expensive and not enough people are using those papers, so their practices may be very environmentally sound and sustainable, but they won't be allowed to sell that paper if they don't maintain certification. So I think those spaces of, again, where we are speaking in theory to a great cause, but in practice is a little bit challenging, is definitely an ongoing circumstance.
Thank you, Michelle and Tanya. Would you like to add to this? To go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, again, it is like about these limited resources, and also about, I guess, like, you know, there's, yeah, in a way, we are located in an area which is like you kind of have to import everything. If you were going more the channel of like, you know, how mega cities have been established, where it's like you kind of have all the conveniences around you, whatever you need, whenever you want. But as, yeah, we've been talking about, I think that for us, it's like trying not to import so much, but trying to create like these new ways of working that is more decentralized, you know. And there are limited resources. So when it comes to like what we can choose, it's very limited. And then we try to choose the lesser of evils in a way. But you know, in Norway, I would say that there's quite good funding when it comes to the arts. and there's never like a surplus, but somehow we always manage to like work kind of resourcefully with the funding that we get. So quite a bit comes from the Norwegian Arts Council, and that at least covers like a sort of an operational budget of ours. And then we, apply for project grants, etc., as well as a mixed economy of what we sell through our bookstore and other different channels. So yeah, we're not really functioning as a business model. It's more like a project platform in a way. And and that also has its own challenges. But it's interesting to think about how money circulates and these false economies that that Michelle had mentioned earlier in our chat.
Thank you, Tanya. So I'm not working with large scale printers, so I'm not getting printing bills that are $30,000 to $60,000, which I know is the reality for a lot of offset books. I'm working with very small scale inkjet coated papers. So, I'm buying in boxes of 25 sheets to make a couple of books. And it is my impression that unfortunately inkjet coated paper is not recyclable because of the coating. That is my impression. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, Delphine is saying yes. So that is often disappointing to me. And I am very aesthetically concerned with my books, so I think of them almost as tactile sculptural objects. So I am very concerned with the paper that I'm using and how it feels and how it looks. Unfortunately, a lot of beautiful paper that I love comes from Japan, and I'm on the East Coast of the United States. So obviously that's not the most, in terms of shipping and the giant shipping containers, as we just saw the disaster, the shipping container disaster in America. Those, I'm sure my paper is coming over on those shipping containers. A lot of inkjet paper distributors are based in Europe. I'm not as familiar with paper companies that are American based. Maybe Canson is, I'm not sure. So I am kind of working under different guidelines for how I print my books, but I am thinking about all these same things. So thank you for the question, Delphine.
What we see emerging in the conversation is also sustainability understood as a means of production, local resources versus global resources, modes of distribution, but also publishing as a way to build communities, which I think is really crucial in this conversation, trying to create commonality in sharing resources. You were saying, João and Alix, like the network you try to create in Brazil. Tanya, you also said you started as a distribution places, and Michelle, also your broad experience in publishing brought you to this model where the buyer becomes a co-publisher of the book. Could you say a few words about that model, which I think is quite unique?
Yes, thank you. It really came from looking at projects that were not moving forward into traditional publishing environments. As you know well, Delphine, from 2008 was a wonderful time and challenging time, a lot of shifts and changes. And the rise of on-demand printing brought a lot of people into publishing. And so I started to think about audience and how do we engage an audience to understand that actually they are essential to the publishing of a book. If they aren't buying books, people are not going to continue making books, so to keep this ecosystem and cycle functioning. And some of this was just math to say, okay, I know that for $25,000 on average, that is what it costs. That's a break-even point to produce a photography book. in offset, looking at approximately 1,000 copies. And so 500 copies at $50 resulted in $25,000. So that means if we achieved our goal, we were starting at zero from a profit perspective, but we could cover the cost of making the book. And it felt important to me that people understood the significance. So seeing their name in the book created a kind of ownership that as an editor or as the photographer, you see your own name in the book. It's a lovely experience to see your name in a book. And so to give that to the audience and show them how significant their role was. And at first, when we started, I remember Connor Reish from Photo District News, a magazine that is sadly no longer with us, said to me privately after he interviewed, I wasn't sure what it would look like to get a book and have all these names in the back of the book. I think it will be kind of ugly and I won't like it. And when the first book came out, he called me and said, oh my gosh, to see all these names, some of which I know, some of which I don't know, but they're there, it's a record, is very powerful. And someone said to me just last year when we marked our 10th year of publishing, your books prove that 400 people have seen this book. And today when which I had not ever thought about, but today when we think about audience and books that are being funded to be made, but we don't really know actually, because it's so expensive to get them forth into the world, where they're going. So to have a record that, yes, these books exist and an audience is receiving them and that audience has an ownership over them, and that's important to me.
Yes, I mean, in English, in its etymology, publishing means making things public. But at that time, the publicness was like someone going through the street and shouting the news. So that was the origin of the word, which has different origin in different languages, obviously. And so by publishing, you actually create an audience, you create a community by the very act of publishing. And I see a lot of very broad questions in the chat about sustainability and what should be encompassed and taken in account in this conversation. Michelle, thank you for sharing this production model of involving directly the audience as kind of co-author or co-ownership into the production. And I would like to go back also to you, Tanya, because you were mentioning many times also working with locally versus globally, like the challenge that you face in terms of access to resources, but also the trying of the sharing of knowledge and the community you're trying to build around publishing to highlight and give a space for narratives that have been erased or marginalized. And I'm curious to hear more how you're proceeding to make this happen. And
yeah, good question. I mean, I think that through the book fair, that's one way I think of trying to create a kind of, well, the book fair, maybe I didn't elaborate so much on, includes like quite a bit of research in terms of mapping, kind of like trying to understand what has come before now, in terms of, you know, who had the power to publish and which publishing houses, what technologies were they using, what was available at the time. And that also means like a lot of it has been sort of like been centered around Norwegian publishing and Norwegian publishing houses. And so I started to look also in the north, particularly in northern Norway, and trying to map out, like starting with small scale Sami publishers, which are mostly like literature based. not so much art books, but creating this kind of like cartography or an understanding, a constellation of what is being made now. And so bringing what has historically been made in this region and also currently, I think, well, the book fair in a sense is like also building knowledge around like historical publishing in the circumpolar north. So not only in northern Norway, but also different areas. Yeah, and we hope to continue to build on that as we bring it to different communities.
Because you said it's a touring fair, and the next edition will be in 2 years in Greenland, and that's also a very unique model in a region that is being considered for decades as being a more stable politically, but now it's extremely volatile in so many ways. So I'm also interested in to hear more about these traveling geographies that you are trying to create through the book fair.
Yeah, I think that to answer that quickly, I think also that that Greenland it's like a colonial or has been under colonial rule of Denmark, and so they were quite. Yeah, there's strong allyship between northern Norway, Sápmi, indigenous northern communities, and Greenland. So, but it's also like, I think it's also quite challenging to make something nomadic or mobile. We don't know how it will go. So the first one, which was based locally in Tromsø, went very well, but we're very aware there's a need. We need to feel a need from another community that they would like to also co-host this with us, so that we're not, like parachuting in and like imposing some idea of what a book fair should be. There's a very rich like publishing history in Greenland, and also a literary scene and art scene. It's very vibrant, and politically active scene. So I think that there was like a very strong response, and had we not got that response, maybe we would rethink where the next one would be. But there seems to be a kind of like desire from our partners there to continue with it and to explore it as like a way of binding partnerships. So let's see.
Thank you. And on this inclusion of different voices and narrative, I would like to go back to you, Michelle, because you said about how you select authors and the stories you publish, also your attention to cater to also voices that are not given normally center stage.
Yes, thank you. We, being based in the Northwest, we have published a lot of artists who are from this region. But I am also very conscious of the fact that photography is not in the US. We have a lot of artists now who are getting more attention from underrepresented backgrounds, but there are not very many curators, publishers. All of the other parts of the ecosystem are still a fairly homogenous environment in terms of ethnic background and education, and I fall into that also. I went to a college where many of my colleagues also attended, Bard College, and so thinking about ways that we can continue to bring different ways of storytelling. So when I'm working with Indigenous artists or working with Black American artists, or working with women, how my own ability to speak with them about their work and what is important to share. So I think a prime example with Adrienne Burrell's book, it's a first book that we just released in February. It is a book that's been very well received by a Black American audience because they understand elements that he is more nuanced about in his storytelling related to ideas of Afrofuturism. We made a choice not to over-explain that method of storytelling to an audience that may not be familiar with it. Because in this case, we wanted to privilege the audience that it was really intended for. And sometimes those decisions become very important to a smaller audience than the audience that's actually owning the book. But using text and images together, most of our books include a text by someone other than the artist, not always. Sometimes Selena Carney, who is a Chehalis tribal member, her book is about Native American stereotypes. So looking at sports jerseys, looking at Halloween costumes, and showing essentially stereotype within mainstream culture. And the only text in the book is hers because we had a tough time even getting Indigenous writers to write about it. It's hard work. But we made the decision to publish the book anyway. And so I think some of those choices remain important. Again, balancing our intention and ego with, can we find a community who believes with us? And sometimes these days, we're also finding people who don't want to own the books, but will buy them for donation to a library, will buy them for other purposes. So I'm also curious to pose back to the panelists. When we think about distribution, there's the sales component, of course, which is important, but then also how are we putting books in the hands of audiences who maybe have moved into other forms of communication? So I've started as an experiment bringing books into my college students because I want them to hold books. And so I'm curious for all of you, what are the ways as you are engaging with people that you are just placing books in front of new audiences? Sorry, the book fair obviously being a prime example, Tanya, and João and Alix, the bookstore itself, of course, two very important opportunities. And Emily, of course, we see each other often at book fairs where we are trying to put books in people's hands.
So maybe, Emily, you want to answer how you bring your books to an audience, or how do you create an audience through the act of publishing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Michelle. Yes, yeah, I do teach. And the first thing that I know in my heart as an artist is that artists make things. That's what we do. We have to make things. So that's why this conversation is so important, to figure out what are the most responsible ways to make things and gain an audience. I teach my students the importance of the physical art object. So not looking at things on screens and looking at things on paper, and having photographs that you can touch and books that you can hold is a huge part of my curriculum. That's like where I start everything. Also on the note of being an artist who makes things, that comes into my personal life and the choices I make in terms of sustainability and the products I buy to clean my houses, and everything, because I know this footprint that I have, this this book footprint and photographic print footprint. So I try to make choices in my personal life to be more sustainable. In terms of audience, my audience, I would say, are people who like photo books. So a lot of people who go to art book fairs are already versed somewhat in the language of art books. So it's people who maybe studied photography or loves workshops, hobbyists who love workshops. So I would say it is a very, it sometimes feels like a very insular community that has like a certain language that people already know. I tried to show my books at like a non-art book fair, and the people there just didn't really, I don't think they understood what they were looking at, maybe. That's not to sound judgmental of them, but I really do find my audience at the art book fairs, because people are kind of aware of the language of art book publishing in those spaces. I think that could be improved upon in my practice, or yeah, I'm curious to hear what other people have to say about this, but yeah, I think that's my experience with the audience.
As was mentioned in the beginning of the talk, I've been teaching publishing for about 15 years, and I started all the classes with this question: is your book worth cutting trees? And which is a provocation, but also a reality. And by this, I mean also what's the urgency of that project? Does it have to exist in its form? Should it be a book? Should it be a performance? Could it be a poem? Could it exist in any other kind of ways? And when we talk about extractivism and scarcity of resources, it's like, where are we standing now? I stopped my publishing house, but I'm curious to hear if someone wants to pick up on this challenging question and say, how do you see the future of your practice? And the role of books in circulation of knowledge, of circulation of, as we said, also as a potential for highlighting narratives that have been marginalized. And so there is this contradiction, there is this tension, this very high tension that we all feel of these two movements, this contradictory movement of wanting to create this platform and circulate these stories, but and the other side of it, which is the impact it has. Anyone wants to pick up?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just thinking after our preparatory conversation, just thinking about some numbers, because sometimes we don't speak frankly about the costs, but also realizing when I was working within a publishing house, we at Chronicle, at Aperture, we were producing 25 to 30 books a year. I've produced 30 books in a decade. I mean, I make closer to 3 books a year. And again, thinking about demand, I mean, I feel very aware that we are in a rich time of publishing, that there are a lot of pieces of printed matter that are being created. And again, I'm curious about not only the currency, right, of selling, that is one element, but also how else are those books moving forward? Because books that are being funded are actually being sold for the same dollar price point as some other books are. So why, right? Why aren't some of those books just being distributed and given away? I took books during the pandemic. I took books to the local grocery store where people were working. And I took 100 books and asked the manager to give it to the workers. And they were so surprised because these books are, you know, they're objects, they're heavy and precious and they feel special. But there's also a lot of people who will never spend $50 for one of those things. That's a steak, that's a shirt, that's other things that they value. And so thinking through, how do we open up that audience? Because I think that it is a question, and to your question, Delphine, for me, it's a constant question of how long do we continue to do this? Is there still a need? And what is that need? And is it time to teach Alix and João what I've spent 30 years learning so they can take this forward in another way, in another place? I mean, for me, those are real questions. Those are real questions. My artists will always say, there's a need. Don't stop making the books. And so when they say that, we will continue. But I think we have to keep asking because they take a lot of resources.
Yeah, and there is this tension also of censorship, of being with withdrawn, especially in the US, from library or question of access. I mean, I research feminist publishing in particular in France. We see that from the Gutenberg press to the law of the freedom of press, it was forbidden for women, and I mean women in the political sense, to be a printer, a librarian, or a publisher, or at the risk of their own life. So we sometimes take for granted the fact that we can publish, but in most part of the world, it's impossible. So it still remains a privilege to access any form of publishing. I know artists who make books in one copy because that's and create specific condition to view that one copy because of the context they're working in. And I'll be curious to hear more also from João and Alix about the kind of networks they mention in the artists they publish also and the networks they create in South America and how you see these questions.
Yeah, I think for example here in Brazil, and I think in other places also, but at least all the festivals and book fairs that we participated as publisher, you have an obligation to leave at least one book from your catalog to be donated to a library. So, and for example, Festival Imaginária, which we're talking about, they have a really nice partnership with a public library in a place called Paraisópolis, which is a neighborhood here in São Paulo that has the second largest favela here. And because most of the events and distribution of art books are still very centralized to specific areas in the city.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for us as consumers and also bookmakers to open this range of distribution and open our audience. And I feel like we cannot call a book or sustainable or just, I don't know, earth aware or anything if we're not, if it remains circulating this very tiny group of people, because at least here, the photobook community is still a very small niche group, especially of rich people. And the idea of we need to circulate this book in other marginalized areas, and we need to put this book in the world and to leave this centralized area. But I think what's something that's very difficult for us here and to kind of find a balance here is that the books are very expensive to make. I know Tanya mentioned funding, for example. We don't really have a lot of funding for the arts here, especially the last years where the government was in shambles, basically. There are very few public fundings for the arts. So most of the time we are taking money from our own pockets to make books. So I think it's really important that us as publishers, I mean, we really need to think about who is the audience that we're trying to reach with our books and about ways of creating this community distribution. I think that's the only way that we're actually going to make those books circulate. At least for us at Selo Turvo, we always separate a percentage of the copies of our books to be donated to libraries, not only in Brazil, but also in South America, which I think it's really important collectively to really push this distribution.
I think that exactly what you're saying is also why we are all here together, which is so important. And I'm thinking of a recent circumstance that is still a challenge for me, of a book that we have that has global demand, and we don't have the relationships to get it to all of the people who want to buy it. But we have bookstore relationships, for instance, in Berlin and in Dublin, where now so we don't have formal distribution in those places, but we have bookstores that we are sending customers to those bookstores to buy the book from them. So they know that they are getting orders. So then they order from us. And so even though the shipping is expensive, which it is, there's no question, but we're getting some of those copies out there. So I think that those are opportunities that we can all continue to speak about. Because, for instance, you know, Emily's going to be at the New York Art Book Fair. I'm going to be at the APAD Photography Fair. Like, if I have 5 of your books, I will take them there, you know. And there are ways that we start small, maybe, but sorry, Emily, not to volunteer you for that, but there are ways I think we can start with some of Tanya's books, some of your books, where we do a small exchange and see what happens. This is how publishing, certainly in photography, has worked for like 100 years. Sometimes we have to go back to some old, simple methods, I think.
And I should say, I'm working on such a tight profit margin with my books because I try to keep the cost quite low to cover the production. Often, you know, I'm not paying myself for my time, as I'm sure many of us aren't. That working with bookstores becomes not an option for me because of the percentage the bookstores need to take. So that's why I have to resort to selling things directly through my website and directly to consumers at book fairs.
Thanks, Emily. And I would like, before we take, there are some questions in the panel. Before we take them, I would like to ask one more question. It's like, which is the most urgent, crucial point for you on your agenda now to resolve? From your experiences, the challenge you encounter, what's high on your agenda, or is there something here we could put in common and pull for the future in regard to future model like of solidarities, of sharing, of making? It's a broad question, but
my answer is so boring, but really I am trying to figure out this issue with packing material and plastic tape and bleached cardboard and bubble wrap, plastic bags for each of my books. Every time I pack up a book, I feel a little guilty inside. So I'd really like to figure that out. And Uline is a huge distributor of packing material in America, and they're very right-wing. They have extremist right-wing views and views that definitely do not align with my own. So I am seriously trying to figure out that issue.
Well, I think it would be interesting to crowdsource answers to this, because today the panel is for Earth Day, which is the largest, you know, world movement online, and the goal of for this year of Earth Day is to reduce plastic production and consumption by 60% by 2040. So you're raising this question of the usage of plastic into shipping. So I think maybe SPV network could pick up this point on their network, on their website, and see if there are different responses in terms of packaging. I know in the Netherlands there are a lot of processes invented that are outside different materials. So there are solutions currently in the making that are more sustainable than plastic, for sure. Yes, Tanya?
Just a quick note. Not that we don't use plastic, but we try and like recycle, you know, materials that are sent to us. So for example, bubble wrap that's sent to us, and also a lot of the envelopes and packaging, cardboard boxes. So we've made like both Mondo stickers and also large scale stamps that we then just like reuse what has been sent to us and like stamp our label on it and then ship it off. So not that answers any questions around plastic, but more like also thinking about reuse of materials, that maybe we can just reuse, like there's such a surplus of materials within publishing and yeah, also within art books, etc., that I think that maybe that's also well, yeah, maybe it can reduce the carbon footprint a little bit.
Thank you, Tanya. There are some questions from the audience that we can take. Almost an impossible question to answer, but what are the criteria by which we should find the best, most sustainable publishing practice? So material distribution, localism, just-in-time production, any ideas and views welcome. But I think through the different panelists, many answers already came forward for this question. This is all fascinating, actually reassuring that there are people involved in such a niche sector who want to make such a difference for the benefits of the future and the future of a long-term world. It'd be interesting what the panel thinks about the way that curatorial practice can potentially play into debates about sustainability. This is when it comes to curatorial practice, if we track, there is a whole regeneration movement. Some museums, for instance, have issued very clear guidelines in terms of sustainability, and that's really changed from country to country or region to region. In the Netherlands, it's just starting, but for instance, in terms of music festival, they have already a much more advanced system of regeneration. So this is definitely a conversation to push demands forward. As someone wants to add something about their local context in regard to this, some experience?
I guess I would kind of go back to something we've been touching upon. Two things, really. One is advancements in on-demand printing, because this is a major part of the last 20 years that did not exist before that. And I continue to try to push to understand how we can improve quality and consistency in quality through on-demand. Because I think that that is an opportunity where we can be producing the number of books to the number of people who want to own that book, while still investing in design and intellectual process and all of these things, but limit the expenses. But consistent quality is not easy to achieve from copy to copy. But the second part is partnerships. So if a museum is spending $5,000 to $7,000 to produce a brochure, but that money could go toward Tanya making a book, how do those things work together so that interest in the same artist or topics or subjects, we are best utilizing those resources for what is happening within a space and then what exists beyond the space. And I think that there are many more opportunities in terms of partnership. We have done some of that, but there's many more that could.
Yeah, Tanya will have to leave as she has an opening. She will have to leave soon the museum. So we will quickly soon round up the conversation. But I think to start to make an inventory, there are many publishers that have been also addressing this question. Half Letter Press in the US have issued several publications around the question of waste, of recycling, of production model. There are publishers alliances, writers alliances, models developed by museums. There is also the Green Art Alliance, which is a coalition of art center developing ecological practice. But there has not been yet a platform that gather a bit all these initiatives which are very interesting and relevant, and maybe this panel could be the opportunity to emphasize or shed light on more marginalized or more out of the box proposition. And are there more questions from the audience that we would like to take on? Please put them in the chat so we can address them.
There's two questions, Delphine, in the Q&A.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you like to read them?
Yeah, I can do that. So there's a question from GD McClintock, who's asking, increasingly, photobook designers privilege empty space over images in books. Many photobooks are 50 to 75% blank pages, for example, with images occupying 25% or even less of a 2-page spread. How can this be sustainable? What do we think about blank space?
Well, as a very long time book designer, always having a blank page on the left and an image on the right was the norm for probably the first 20 years to try and create a space that appeared as if works were on a wall. That the book was a space where the assumption was that was the only place people were going to see work. So I think we are in a different world, and having conversations around why something should be in a book certainly relates to its design and production. But I think that we also have to think about, if we're putting anything in print, certainly in offset, it is also about the experience of the work. It is not what is the most efficient way we can put the most number of images into the least amount of space, right? That is not the starting point of the creation of the photo book. So yes, conversations around why is this in book form is certainly something that we've all discussed. But I think it has to be the starting point.
Yeah, I have some numbers here. Like, for instance, in the US, publishing industry use 32 million of trees annually to make books. And we know that also a huge percentage of the books that are produced are being pulp, and the pulp is thrown away in wasteland. So I think questioning like what is called in the industry vanity publishing, like someone say now it becomes like a necessary step for an emerging photographer. Initially it was more to bypass gatekeepers, but now it becomes like, oh, I need to have my photo book in order to start a career. So it's a whole ecosystem that we need also to think in terms of exhibition, of what is a career making, what is exhibition making, the kind of resources and strategy we use, the kind of material we use. It's a much more complex conversation to have. I think this is the first step we have tonight to kind of map different geographies and strategies and local versus global. But these are very urgent and necessary question to address. I mean, we speak of sustainable publishing, but there is, of course, nothing sustainable about publishing. It's very extractivist, there was other question from Tasmin from the audience. One more,
There's one more from Sibylla Smith. Hello, and thank you for your work and expertise. I'm curious of thoughts on two aspects of our photo book movement. The first one is ways to expand audiences beyond the photo and art community, which I think we've touched on a little bit in some of the previous answers, and how to address the lack of criticality around the medium, as proposed by Matt Johnston in his brilliant book, Photo Books. And I think, yeah, would anyone like to address those questions? So the first one is, how do we expand the audience? And the second one, yeah, how do we improve criticality around the medium?
I think some those may be related. And I think some of the challenges that we see with our publishing model is where there is demand. So when we published a book about music photography, we sold 500 copies in a matter of hours. Other books that we've tried to do on climate change and other topics take 3 months. And so sometimes it is a question of where is the audience interest? And we don't always, what we are interested in and what we want to be seen as important is not always what an audience is responding to. And that is painful for us to process, but I think there is some realities to face there. And in terms of criticality, I think that's a self-fulfilling prophecy of moving away from the notion of gatekeepers. There was a reaction to having filters, and so we wanted to open this up. But as a result of this being opened up, also it's open. And so to me, that's a logical, again, I carry perhaps a different perspective from these last years, decades, but I said many years ago, I'm not always sure that everyone deserves a photography book, which was often a very complicated statement. But I've also worked for many photographers where in 40 years they had one book. One that spoke to their career. And we live in a different time now. And I think that there are good parts of that, but it also raises some complex questions.
And coming from the industry, how do you explain that the digital photo book never took on?
I'm sorry, say that again, Delphine?
Coming from the industry, how do you explain that the digital photo book, for instance, never took on?
The digital photo book? I mean, I think that it really goes back to the notion of a book as a historically, like for the last 2,000 years, as a sacred object. And we have not found another way of affirmation of what creates the same feeling in our hearts when we hold a book with our work in it. And we have to really look at that if we want artists to feel affirmed, if we want them to progress in their academic careers, in their professional careers, the book has held this kind of place. And how do we free that? How do we free that? Or how do we say you can produce 5 copies of it and that is valid and important? It may mean a lot to the 4 other people who own it. And that is meaningful. But we aren't quite there, in my opinion. We are not quite there yet, where we are creating the same sense of affirmation that people feel when they've had a book published. And it's a challenging time. Yes, we don't want Tanya locked.
So there's one more question, if we can just come to that quickly, and then I think we'll close because we've run over. So Oliver Smith is saying, it strikes me that we need to establish a sort of sustainability quotient in book publishing. It's not just a calculation of whether the inks are vegetable-based or the paper is responsibly sourced and can be recycled, but will it last a lifetime? Is it intended to last a lifetime? If the intended purpose is for quick effect, then it should be ephemeral and easy to recycle or biodegradable, but if not, it should be durable and not throw away. We don't want to cut down trees only for them to be thrown away. And I think this is a question that's come up quite a lot actually as part of previous SPP network conversations on, are we creating books that are made to last, when we also know there's issues around things like pulping books that aren't sold. So should we be thinking more about the books that are going to last forever and the books that are more ephemeral and are circulating now? I guess that's the essence of the question, if anyone would like to answer that.
I think I would like to give the word to Tanya because she has to leave very soon. So
I think that it's both. Can we do both? You know, like I'm kind of I think exploring both these perhaps like biodegradable biodegradable organic materials that disintegrate at the same time as maybe books that are that have this durability. I think it depends a little bit on the project. I feel like, for me at least, the project kind of often guides the path that it takes, also to its audiences whose hands it reaches and where it circulates. So I feel like the book kind of often governs a lot of questions that I have around the production of it. And so I would say maybe both. There's like pros and cons to both. And then there's also, yeah, like digital books, but that's another, another topic that we've touched upon, but also something that we've been thinking about in Mondo. So I'm kind of like, I'm open and kind of like, I'm open for exploring all of these options, actually. I don't know if there's one better than another.
In your artistic practice, you developed the idea of counter prospecting. Could you say just a few words about that, which I think is very interesting?
Sure.
Proposal.
I mean, yeah. Very often it's referred to in the context of mining. So prospecting is, to normally to lay claims to a specific plot of land in order to prospect what is there, what is profitable, what is valuable. And my collaborator and I, Emilia Skanlita, we have this platform called New Mineral Collective, and one of our sort of the methodologies that we work with is called counter prospecting, and that is about thinking about counter values. I would say, like thinking about alternative values that are needed in the world, other than gold and resources and metals, for example, in mining. And that this sounds very idealistic, but I think that it's a good starting point for imagining, ways in which things could be different and ways in which we could do things differently. And sometimes they come out in speculative proposals, and sometimes they come out in real objects. Yeah, so counter prospecting can kind of be applied to anything if you think about it. But yeah, I guess it's about imagining the world differently than where we are, where the world has led us to now, and other alternative futures that we can imagine.
I think it's a perfect point to round up our conversation and opening future ones. Knowing that some of you have to go, Emily, you have to teach, Tanya, you have to leave the museum that's closing, and we're all in different time zones, as we said, in 6 different time zones, and we're already over time. So I want to thank you all very warmly for joining this conversation that I hope we can continue, and not only on Earth Day. And thank you, Tasmin, and thank you, Dolly, for bringing us together tonight and or today, depending on where you are. And I'll let you close this panel. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Delphine. Yeah, I mean, what a rich discussion it's been this evening's. Well, for me in London, it's the evening. And it's, as always, we really hope these discussions encourage an ongoing dialogue on Photobook ecosystem and sustainability. So let's keep talking about these issues. Huge thank you to Delphine for the moderation, and to all of our speakers, Tanya, Michelle, João and Alix, Emily, and to everybody who joined and asked questions. And the conversation will be available on YouTube at some point if anyone would like to watch it back. But yeah, thank you, everybody.
And there will be a transcript also. And thank you for joining us from really all around the world, from India to America to so many places. It's incredible. So and feel free to reach to all of us. We are all online one way or another. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.